Hi, and welcome to Teaching Tip Tuesday, brought to you by the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning at UWSP. If you're like me, you probably can't count the number of times that a student's proudly informed you that they know exactly what kind of learner they are. Our students have been steeped in a culture that accepts both the existence of learning styles as some immutable attribute of individuals, and in which there is a pervasive belief that learning not only occurs best when the mode of instruction is matched to an individual student's learning style, but in some cases, that students can't learn if the mode of instruction isn't matched to their learning styles. Over the next few weeks, I want to delve into the pseudoscience of learning styles. This week, I'll kick off a three-part series on this topic with an overview of some of the criticisms of learning styles and the harms that can result from continued adherence to this junk science. Next week, I'll go over some really intriguing ideas about why this junk science has taken such a strong hold on educational culture in the U.S. These two videos won't contain a lot of actionable teaching tips, but due to the complexity of the topic and the widely held misunderstandings surrounding it, it's important to begin with debunking. Finally, I'll conclude this series with a couple of evidence-based alternatives to trying to cater to a variety of student learning styles in your teaching. The idea of learning styles has been with us almost forever as an attempt to describe differences between individual learners and to characterize how they learn. Some of the earliest work was summarized by Newman when he tried to consolidate earlier notions of learning styles into three main types: auditory learners, motor learners, and visual learners. This probably sounds familiar to you because loads of others have followed in this same mold. Although there are a lot of different models for describing learning styles and related cognition styles, we don't have time to go into all of them. The most well-known are probably the VAC and VARC models. These focus on learning preferences for visual, auditory, reading and writing, or kinesthetic modes of receiving information. In most cases, the preference for or effectiveness of these different modalities are self-identified through Likert-type questionnaires, although there are some tests for learning style that involve teachers using similar types of questionnaires to assess how they think individual students learn best. Just Google learning style quiz and you'll get a lot of options for tests to diagnose yourself. These kinds of tests produce handy labels for different types of learners, and people love labels. I don't know why. Maybe being able to boil down something complex into a label gives them a sense of having a greater understanding of or control over something that's actually pretty complex. I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, etc. But what do those labels actually tell us? What is their value? The putative value of these labels, according to various theories of learning and cognitive styles, is associated with two principal assumptions. First, that we all have a stable and measurable learning style based on hardwired information processing differences in which we learn best. And second, that teaching in a modality that matches the individual learning style of a student will lead to greater academic achievement for that student. The flip side of this is that teaching in a modality that doesn't match the learner's style will decrease academic achievement. These seem pretty intuitive and easy to understand, which may account for their popularity, but let's take a moment to pick them apart. Let's really consider that first assumption. Do learners have a hardwired, consistent style of learning that can be measured? Well, there are some large potential problems with many of the surveys purporting to measure learning styles. These diagnostic tests to determine one's learning style involve self-completed questionnaires. These are not a form of diagnosis that looks objectively at outcomes of different learning experiences to determine what forms of instruction produce the greatest learning. They rely on subjective impressions of individuals and tend to focus on learner satisfaction with different instructional modalities. This leads to three significant problems off the bat. First, this is a measure of preference, not of how students learn best, nor of how effective different modalities of instruction are for a particular learner. Second, in practical use, these self-reported learning styles are not validated. You just take a test and get a label. Finally, the validation studies that have rigorously compared self-identified learning styles with actual learning gains have either shown no relationship or, in some cases, that teaching modalities that differ from the student's self-identified styles actually produce greater learning gains. It turns out people are poor judges of what constitutes an effective modality for their learning. There are some great analyses that contend that this is because people tend to prefer what's easier for them, and that the moderate struggle associated with less aligned modalities, because it involves more effort and therefore deeper engagement, is more productive for learning. So, the overwhelming consensus is that without validation, self-identification methods of determining learning styles are flawed by conflating learner preference and effectiveness of different modalities. But what about the kind of tests that have instructors determine the student's learning style? It turns out that these are not better. In spite of our efforts, we instructors are people, we're flawed, and we often rely on stereotypes and hidden biases as we make presumptions about our students. Research has shown that instructors are more likely to label high-performing students as visual learners and low-performing students as kinesthetic learners. This goes back to the work of Mills in 1956. He tied some of these different types of learning to intelligence differences. This stereotype is borne out because parents and students alike each attach higher value to visual learning and lower value to kinesthetic learning, tying them to different levels of intelligence and different desirability. So where are we left on the methods of measuring learning style? Absolutely nowhere. All we've measured is preferences and possibly tapped into instructor bias to produce labels that could be detrimental to students. To effectively measure learning style, that is, what is effective for an individual student, we'd have to test various modalities of instruction and whether or not those produce greater or lesser learning. To my knowledge, this is not a part of how learning styles are identified. What about the rest of our first general assumption? Even if we're measuring preferences and not the modality in which students learn most effectively, are learning styles consistent? Are they an immutable trait of individual learners? Nope. There are many studies that indicate that self-reported learning styles or preferences can change according to topic. This makes sense. Am I learning statistics or how to spike a volleyball? If it's statistics, give me the book. If it's volleyball, show me. They can also change over time. And they may change based on the time of day, mood, level of fatigue, and all sorts of situational factors. So we can't really think of learning styles measured in these questionnaires as immutable traits. At best, they're temporary states, influenced by a host of other variables. So just from this quick overview, it should be apparent that whenever people talk about their learning style, you shouldn't just take it with a grain of salt, but with a whole shaker. But we're not done. What about our second prediction? Does teaching in a modality that matches the individual learning style of a student lead to greater academic achievement for that student? Or does teaching in a modality that doesn't match the learner's style impede academic achievement? This is usually described as the matching hypothesis. And you might be surprised to learn that over the long history of various conceptions of learning and cognition styles, there have been relatively few good experimental studies on the effect of matching instructional modality to preferred student learning style on student learning, and about 1 billion poorly designed, poorly controlled correlational studies. This problem was so pronounced that in 2009, Paschler et al. Published a review of the literature in which they outlined the research design that would be required for meaningful study of the matching hypothesis. And even so, there haven't been many takers since that time. So, what do the studies that are good studies say? They say that this hypothesis is overwhelmingly not supported. I invite you to read the review articles that are linked to this video because there's way too much to go into here. But teaching to a student's preferred learning modality does not improve learning, and some research shows the opposite. This is not surprising at all, given the mutability and situational nature of learning styles and preferences. Even when instructors identify the student's learning style, the matching hypothesis is not supported. Lastly today, I'd like to discuss why we should care. If labeling ourselves or our students by learning styles makes everybody happy, which it seems to, why fight it? I'd say because it's harmful. Misinformation based on pseudoscience always comes with a cost. First, there's an opportunity cost associated with holding discredited ideas about how one learns best. Students and instructors may be less receptive to other strategies for learning that are better supported by the available research. Improvement in student learning may be obtained by changing strategies, and holding on to this misinformed belief may prevent us from seeing those improvements. Second, there are time and monetary costs associated with trying to individualize education to match the instructional modality of learning styles. I'd rather spend my time and money on something that actually works. Third, there's a negative potential effect associated with labeling learners. Labels create expectations. Those expectations can exacerbate stereotype and lead to pigeonholing that reduces the opportunities that we present to individual students. Finally, notions of some sort of consistent and immutable learning style promote a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset. How can we expect anybody to work toward improvement if they think they can only learn in one way? Given the lack of experimental support for the matching hypothesis, flaws in diagnosis, and potential harms associated with investing in this junk science, it is well past time to consign learning styles to the trash bin of history. Next week, I'll explore some ideas about why this pseudoscience has taken such a strong hold on the educational culture of the United States. And that's this week's teaching tip brought to you by the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning here at UWSP. Remember, at CITL, we offer support for course design, learning activities, assessment, and pedagogy. Visit our website to schedule a consultation today.